Today, we're talking about someone almost everyone recognizes, the 14th Dalai Lama. But his life story, well, it's an absolute epic. It's a journey that takes him from this incredibly isolated, sacred palace in Tibet right onto the world stage. So let's dive in. And really, to get a sense of his global impact, you have to start here. These are his words when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. It just perfectly sums up the person the world knows, right? This global icon for peace, a voice for the oppressed. But, and this is a big but, that's only half the story. Not even. You see, he's really two different people, depending on who you ask. For his own people, the Tibetans, he's the Kundun, which means the presence. I mean, think about that. He's seen as the living embodiment of the Buddha of compassion. But for the rest of us around the world, he's become this powerful symbol of peace and nonviolent resistance. It's this incredible duality, a deeply spiritual leader and a global moral authority all in one person. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this incredible story. We've got it in 6 parts. We'll start with the monk and the icon, then the search for him as a boy, his escape as a teenager, building a nation in exile, his philosophy of the middle way, and finally, the huge question of his legacy. All right, part 1, the monk and the icon. This really gets to the heart of it all, how he spent his entire life balancing these two massive roles. So, part 2, the search for a soul. Now we're going way back to the very beginning. And trust me, it's a story that sounds like it's straight out of a movie. So, you might picture a future leader born into royalty or something, right? Nope. He was just Lamo Thandup, a kid from a small farming village. His family were farmers. His origins couldn't have been more ordinary, which makes what happens next just mind-blowing. So how did they find him? Well, this is where it gets amazing. Monks were guided by these incredible visions they saw in a sacred lake. So they travel to this remote village, they find this little 2-year-old boy, and they lay out a bunch of items in front of him. Some of them belong to the previous Dalai Lama, and some were just random decoys. And what does this toddler do? He correctly picks out all the real items. And apparently he even said, "It's mine, it's mine." Can you imagine? Right then and there, his entire life was set on a new path. Part 3, the king and the escape. Because that quiet spiritual upbringing, it was about to come to a crashing halt. A massive political crisis was on the horizon, one that would change everything. So in 1950, China invades Tibet. And in the middle of this crisis, Tenzin Gyatso, that's his monastic name, is given full political power. He's made the head of state. Get this, he was only 15 years old, a teenager basically, handed the impossible job of standing up to a rising global superpower to save his country. A few years later, he actually goes to Beijing for peace talks, and he meets with Mao Zedong himself. And by all accounts, the meeting seemed to be going okay until the very end. Mao leans over to him and says, "Religion is poison." Just like that. In that one absolutely chilling moment, the Dalai Lama knew exactly what was at stake. This was a threat to the very existence of Tibetan culture. And by 1959, everything just boiled over. The situation was explosive. There were rumors of a plot to kidnap him, so thousands of Tibetans literally formed a human shield around his palace to protect him. He realized that if he stayed, it would just lead to a bloodbath. So on March 17th, he makes the impossible decision. He has to escape. It took him 2 weeks, a brutal journey across the Himalayas, before he finally crossed the border into India and was granted asylum. And think about how a figure like this escapes. I mean, we're talking about someone revered as a god king. He didn't have some royal convoy. He slipped out of the palace dressed as a common soldier. Just incredible. Part 4, building a nation in exile. You know, his escape could have been the end of the story, but it wasn't. It was a totally new beginning. The mission changed from ruling a nation to, well, trying to save an entire civilization from vanishing. So he sets up a government in exile in a place called Dharamshala in India. People started calling it Little Lhasa. And his priorities were crystal clear. First, he had to save the culture, so he reestablished hundreds of monasteries. Then, he had to secure the future, so he set up schools for refugee kids, teaching both modern science and Tibetan history. And he drafted a democratic constitution. But the most radical thing he did? In 2011, he just gave up his political power. Voluntarily. He ceded it all to an elected leader. I mean, when does that ever happen? Okay, part 5, the middle way's voice. So with the Tibetan community in exile on more solid footing, he then really turns his attention to the world stage, and he starts promoting this very specific strategy for peace. And this is probably one of the most misunderstood things about his position. He isn't actually asking for full independence for Tibet. His policy, which he calls the middle way approach, is all about seeking genuine autonomy for Tibet, but within the framework of China. So let's just break that down to make it super clear. What he's rejecting is full political independence. What he is asking for is genuine autonomy, the ability for Tibetans to run their own religious affairs, manage their own culture, their own schools, basically to preserve the very soul of their civilization. And it was for this unwavering commitment to nonviolence, over decades of struggle, that he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989. It was really the moment the entire world officially recognized his effort. Which brings us to our final part, a question of legacy. This is where we are right now. It's the most urgent, unresolved chapter of his life, and it's all about who decides what happens next. Really, it all comes down to one huge question. Who chooses the next Dalai Lama? And this is the standoff. On one side, you have the Chinese government, which says it has the legal right to appoint the next Dalai Lama. On the other side, you have the Dalai Lama himself, who has said a few things. One, that his successor will be found in a free country, not in Tibet under current rule. Or, and this is a huge deal, that he might be the last Dalai Lama. He has made it absolutely clear that any choice made by China will be completely illegitimate. So when you just step back and look at his whole life laid out like this, I mean, it's just incredible. Born a simple farm boy in 1935. By 15, he's the political leader of his nation. By his early 20s, he's a refugee. Then he becomes a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And in 2011, he retires from political life. It's just, what a journey. And that really leaves us with this big final question to think about. This whole issue over his successor. It's not just about politics, is it? It really gets at the nature of power itself. I mean, if a spiritual leader's real authority comes from belief, from what's in people's hearts and minds, can a government, any political power, ever truly control their legacy?